A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICAN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So, we will start the day with the quote for the day. The quote goes like this: all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. So, this quote was given by Edmund Burke. So, this quote it shows the importance of courage and conviction when we are doing our duties. There'll be so many times when something bad or something unethical is happening right in front of our eyes, but we get bogged down under the pressure and we do nothing about it. And also, it speaks about the importance of integrity. Integrity is not just doing right when people are watching you, it's about doing the right and the ethical thing when nobody is watching. So nobody might know that you didn't even raise the voice when something unethical was going on in front of you, but you know yourself, your conscience knows that. So it is always important to have that impeccable integrity and be to also undertake our duties with courage and conviction. So this is the importance of this quote, and this is where you can apply it. So many times in the ethics case studies, even when I wrote the exam, there was a question like you are working in some department and you have to give this report, and your seniors are pressurizing to give a clean sheet to somebody, and what do you do in that case? So out of the options, one is to just do as the seniors say and all that. So even while you're writing your case study answers, you can just sprinkle some quotes here and there. So don't overuse it, but you should definitely use some quotes here and there in the case studies. So in that case, you can use this quote to show the importance of having the quality of courage and conviction. You should say that I am not going to be bogged down by the pressure that my seniors are putting on me. So I will definitely do my duty, and I will show courage and conviction, and I'm going to stand up to my own principles, and that I will be bold enough in doing my duty according to the constitutional values. So in those kind of case studies also you can use this. And another important thing is these quotes, you should also, whenever you see these quotes, it is not just replicating in the ethics part of the case studies, the ethics part of the paper, sorry, the case studies part of the paper. Rather, in the section A of ethics also, if you go through the previous year papers, you will see that there will be at least 3-4 questions which are just quotes, and after the quotes the question just says that explain or analyze this statement, that's all. So whenever you are coming across these quotes, so apart from the application that I told in the ethics case studies that you can do it, you must also think how you are going to explain this quote if it is given in the section A of ethics. So do try and attempt this as a section A question. So, and then see if you're able to make sense out of this quote. So we will start with the first topic of the day, which is India-China relations. So we have already seen a lot about India-China relations in the past. So in the recent news has been a very tragic incident where along the line of actual control, India has lost the lives of 20 soldiers in the Galvin Valley. So this is because of the standoff between the Indian and the Chinese soldiers. So now this has escalated. While the news was coming that there is partial disengagement, but the matters have seemed to escalated, and there is the tragic death of 20 soldiers of the Indian Army in the Galvin Valley. So this is the latest news. So related to this, we will analyze a few things. So the first thing, it is called as the Sun Tzu's dictum. So this dictum says the supreme act of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So it is talking about subduing the enemy without fighting. So that is the Sun Tzu's dictum. So yesterday itself we saw several examples which match this dictum. So for instance, China has rammed the Vietnamese fishing boats, and it has led to the killing of the Vietnamese fishermen. Then it has also intruded into the Malaysia's oil drilling activities in Malaysia's exclusive economic zone. Then similarly, China has also renamed many geographic and underwater features in the South China Sea with the Chinese names. So there are several instances which we read yesterday which shows that China has been very aggressive in its territorial claims, whether it is in the South China Sea or across the LAC. So China has been a very aggressive country. So this says that China is not waging any war, but it is still subduing the enemy. So this shows how China's actions have been very much in congruence with this dictum. So this is what China has been doing. But then even with India also, we had the Wuhan summit, and then we have the Mamallapuram summit. So in both of these summits, we agreed with each other that any issue at the border levels, it has to be discussed and deliberated at the bilateral level without making it an international issue or without the involvement of any third party. So these issues will have to be discussed and resolved at the bilateral level was the first thing. And second thing was that whatever it is, there must be peace and tranquility at the border. So these two things were agreed upon as far as the border issues between India and China were considered or concerned. So, however, even after the Mamallapuram and the Wuhan spirit, still China is intruding into the Indian territories across the LAC. So, even in spite of all these, when China is doing that, definitely we must also protect our own territorial integrity. So that is the most important. We are a sovereign country and we have the right to respect and protect our territorial integrity, and no country for that matter can violate this territorial integrity. So we have to safeguard this. Now, what is the importance of Ladakh? Why is China intruding so much here? So first of all, Ladakh has a very strategically important. So what is the strategic importance of Ladakh? So if you remember, even the Kargil war also happened here. So that was between India and the Pakistan. So that is because the Siachen Glacier is in this region. So Siachen Glacier, as we all know, is the highest battlefield in the world. And with the Siachen under the control, any country's army which has the control of the Siachen will have a strategic advantage to look at the troops' movements in the neighboring countries, and also it will provide that strategic advantage to the countries. So this Siachen Glacier is also present in Ladakh. It was this glacier which through which India got control after it launched Operation Meghdoot in 1984. That was to remove these Pakistani soldiers from the region and occupy or capture the Siachen Glacier. For that, India had launched Operation Meghdoot in 1984. And if you look at this Siachen Glacier, towards the west of the glacier lies the Gilgit-Baltistan, which is the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So that is presently there. And towards east is the China-occupied Aksai Chin. So this is the only portion which India is occupying. Now, if this also is now intruded by China, then that will lead to loss of territories and violation of our territorial integrity. So this is the importance of this. As far as China is concerned, China follows this policy of one palm and five finger policy. So the five finger policy of China we have already discussed in one of the previous videos. So what Mao Zedong in the 1950s believed was that Tibet is actually the right palm of China. So Tibet is the right palm of China, and from this emanate five fingers. Which are the five fingers? So one is Ladakh, then is Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Northwest Frontier Regency or the Arunachal Pradesh. So these are the five fingers, and the palm being the Tibet. So all these five areas, according to China, belong to the Chinese actually. So this is the five finger policy of China, which Mao Zedong had believed in the 1950s. So even today, looking at the Chinese activities in these regions, it still maybe it believes that all these areas are still part of China. Apart from the border intrusions that the China is making, China is also having an economic advantage. Rather, it is using all its resources, economic resources also, to gain advantage in the region through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and its Belt and Road Initiative. Through this, that is through the checkbook diplomacy of the China also, it is trying to gain control in all the countries which are neighbors of India. And now that we have strained ties with Nepal. So that has become a diplomatic setback for us. And this China could use it to its own advantage. So our embittered relations with Nepal could be a blessing for China, and it can use this to China's advantage. So that issue is also there. So China, apart from intrusions, our bad relations with Nepal can also be used to its advantage by China. And China is already undertaking this economic checkbook diplomacy, wherein it is trying to develop infrastructure through the CPEC and the BRI. So through this way, China is adopting all the measures to take control over the territories, either directly through the armed forces or indirectly through the economic investments that China is making in these countries. So in this situation, what India should do? First thing that India should do is to open all political lines of communication. So political lines of communication is very important, that it has to be kept open all the time. Even the ones like the special representative, the communication between them, and even between the foreign ministers. So all of this must continue even in the future. So the reason this thing is being stressed, that the political line of communication should always be open, is because if you look at the previous instances where we had some of these incursions, for instance, Depsang, and then we had Chumar. So Depsang was in 2013 and Chumar in 2014, and then Doklam crisis in 2017. If you look at these crises, they were all sooner or later solved through our diplomatic efforts. So it denoted our diplomatic success in diffusing these military crises. So therefore, this might lead to a sense of complacency that yes, we have solved these previous disputes also through diplomatic efforts, and this one is also going to be the same way. But however, we see that this situation is more marked, and the escalation has been more steep. So therefore, this sense of complacency should not be there. And the second thing that India should do is to make a full assessment. India has to go for a full assessment of what actually transpired on the ground. So just, yes, our soldiers have died. It is very natural for us to feel that patriotic emotions, and then be tempted to respond in a very stringent manner. But then we have to take a full assessment of what actually happened on the ground. So we have to hear out what the Chinese leadership has to tell, and only then we have to decide what is the step that lies ahead for us. So this full assessment of the situation is the second thing that India should go for. So this was the whole article about the recent news, and the importance of Ladakh, and why China wants to intrude in Ladakh and gain more territories in the Ladakh. And third, what India should do, and mainly the China's five-finger policy which it is following, and precisely the reason why it is starting these intrusions in the area of Ladakh. So with this, we end this topic. Next is the India-Nepal relations. So in the India-Nepal relations, again, we have seen a lot of developments in the past also. So most recently, we have seen that Nepal has adopted a constitutional amendment through which the three areas, Kalapani, Limpiadura and Lipulekh, have been included in the map of Nepal. It is shown as the territories of Nepal. So now what this article mainly aims to analyze is that when India-Nepal relations are now going through this phase of a down phase, we have to see it from the perspective of our changing relationships. So the main thing we have to understand is the changed equation between India and Nepal symbolizes both a changing India and a changing Nepal. So we have to understand that Nepal is not that Nepal with which we had established friendship in 1950. Nepal has changed, and therefore the nature of India's relationship with Nepal also needs to change. So in this context, we will see what are all the changes that have taken place in Nepal. So accordingly, how should India's relations be with Nepal? So the first change that you can say that has taken place in Nepal is the transition to democracy. So after 250 years of being a monarchy, Nepal has transited to democracy, and since 2008 it has been very regular. So, this transition to democracy is itself one change that has happened in Nepal, and accordingly, it will appreciate a cordial relations by treating it as an independent democratic country which has its own rights. The second thing is regarding the changes that have happened in its society. Why? Because Nepal has been exposed to the globalization in the 1990s. So, after that, several changes have taken place in the society of Nepal, which we will be discussing now. So, this is the second reason. The third reason is also the geographic reason. So, it may sound very strange that geography doesn't change, but the how geography has brought a change in Nepal is because now geography is not a constraint to Nepal. Earlier, Nepal felt that it is a landlocked country, and for access to the ports for trading purposes, it was dependent on India to give that access to the port. But now China is making inroads into Nepal, and China has the capacity to even bore through the Himalaya and set up various infrastructure facilities there to build roads and rails there. So the geography also is now playing a role for Nepal, that it is no longer is no longer hindered by the fact that it is a landlocked country and it is completely dependent on India. So this thing is not happening with Nepal now. So these changes actually show reflect why there was a current cartographic aggression, that is the aggression by showing these areas, the three areas in the map of Nepal by passing the constitutional amendment. So this is there, and also we have to understand that this is not the first time that Nepal has done like this. Even if you remember in 2015 when Nepal was to pass its constitution, this new constitution was also adopted. That time India had raised several concerns. So Nepal adopted the constitution without or rather ignoring our the concerns that we had raised. So this is also there, and Nepal has some genuine concerns with respect to India. For instance, this fact we have also discussed earlier, that India is lagging behind in terms of implementing the projects that India starts in Nepal. For example, this Arun project is being started, the Pancheshwar project has been started, but these things are now far from completion. So this Pancheshwar project is a 5,000 megawatt hydroelectric power project, and if you look at the Nepal's viable hydroelectricity potential, that is 40,000 megawatts, and the country currently generates only about 1,000 megawatts, and it is importing electricity from India. So this Pancheshwar itself would have produced 5,000 megawatts of electricity, but this is not complete. So this lack of progress is also has been the concern of Nepal. Now see how this Nepal is changing. Whatever we have discussed, we will discuss that in detail. So one is the role that the globalization has played in change of Nepal. So since the 1990s, Nepal has been exposed to the countries outside of the subcontinent of that region. So many of the people in Nepal have been migrating in search of better opportunities to West Asia, to Southeast Asia and all that. So people have also migrated to as far as United States and Europe. So many of the students go there for their studies. So if you look at the Nepal's remittance, then Nepal gets a remittance of nearly 8 billion, and this remittance income itself forms nearly 30% of the Nepal's GDP. So this shows the level of how globalization has affected Nepal, and it is one of those countries which is most dependent on the remittance from the other countries. So this shows how Nepal has been exposed to the outside world. Apart from this, there is also the presence of several international NGOs in Nepal. So these international NGOs have been focusing on resolving the conflicts within Nepal and also on elevating the poverty in Nepal. So this international NGOs and the role that they have played in Nepal, that is also added to Nepal's exposure to the world. So Nepal is being more exposed to the world, and the world ideas are also getting influenced in Nepal. So as I said, Nepal is also influenced by the ideas that were surrounding globalization. In that regard, if you look at Nepal's population according to the 2011 census, it has 80% of its population as Hindus. But in 2015, when it formed the constitution, it declared Nepal to be a secular country. So, and fourthly, there has also been the proliferation of information and communication technology, which has made the culture or the behavior so to some extent cosmopolitan. The spread of cosmopolitanism is also there in Nepal because of the exposure to ICT technologies and all that. So all these shows that Nepal is not that Nepal with which we had established relations in 1950. We had signed the Treaty of Friendship in 1950. That was a different Nepal and this is a different Nepal. So therefore, accordingly, we need to realign our relationships with Nepal. The most important learning that we get from here. So Nepal has also then diversified its relations with several countries. Initially, it was just dependent on India for trade. It was just dependent on India for country, and it was dependent on India for trade. Country, and it was dependent on India for trade. Even for lines of credit and aid also, it was dependent lines of credit and aid also, it was dependent on India. So if you look at the biggest lenders of Nepal, at the several multilateral development banks, several multilateral development banks, the biggest lenders of the Nepal. They form the biggest lenders of European Union is in fact Nepal's largest aid donor. The Nepal's largest aid has been widening its basket, and it has been widening its basket, and it has so major investments even in the telecom sector is coming from Malaysia, and also the largest international carrier, also the largest international carrier in Nepal is the Qatar Airways. Nepal has diversified its basket, and Nepal has diversified its basket, developed cordial relations with several countries, developed cordial relations with several countries so as to reduce its dependence on India. So therefore, India should not and should not or is not in a position be overpowering or dictate terms on Nepal, because overpowering or dictate terms on Nepal, because Nepal now has more dependence on more choices. India, it is not like it was earlier on India. But however, there are links irrespective of the there are links irrespective of the diversity. So it is said that even in spite of such diversification, that Nepal has so many options globally, Nepal's linkages with India remain robust. So, if you talk about the overall trade of Nepal, in that 2/3 of Nepal's global trade is with India itself. So, India is the largest trade partner for Nepal. And even India continues to be the largest aggregate investor in Nepal as well. So, recently, this Arun, not recently, but this Arun 3 project, hydropower project, is under construction and it will be completed in due course of time. So this is a very huge investment that India is making. It is a 900 megawatt hydropower plant. So such investments are also made in India, and Nepal needs such investments definitely. And also Nepal's rupiah, the Nepal's currency is also pegged to the Indian rupee. So this will provide a unique stability to the Nepal currency. So all of these links that Nepal has with India is very robust and also unique. So in that way, in spite of diversification, India definitely has an advantage because these links remain robust. So then what is it that we do in the future? So we have to focus, one suggestion that is given is we have to focus on the border areas with Nepal. So we need to have better road infrastructure, better amenities. So one very interesting suggestion that is made is there must be some, we can set up some shopping malls in the bordering areas, because Nepal also has a very big middle class population, or a growing middle class population. So this will be good for the both the sides, and that will keep good relations and a strong relations at people to people level. So similarly, we have several cultural and ethnic commonalities as well. So we have to, we know these commonalities, we know that the links are very robust. So, but we have to be mindful of the changing India and the changing Nepal, and accordingly we must adapt our relationship. So this was with respect to India and education. The next topic is related to the migrants issue. In this article, it mainly dealt with the fact that now, because of the COVID crisis, many migrants have gone back to their villages. So that is, there is a trend of reverse migration that has already set in. Now, for a sustainable future, it would be better if these migrants can find good jobs in their villages itself. So, in this regard, this article is suggesting that, in fact, several of these people or the migrant workers who have moved back to the villages, they have several skills. So, they have their own skill sets. There could be tailors or plumbers, cooks, construction workers. So, the article says that they can all form cooperatives. So cooperatives will give them more bargaining power and more strength in that unity. So it says, for instance, in a village in Bihar, if there are several tailors, so they can come together to form a cooperative society of tailoring. So this way, this cooperative society can attract contracts from the garment manufacturers in Bihar and elsewhere also. So these cooperatives they can expand and they can sell their products on their own terms and conditions. So this will also increase their bargaining power. So all of these adds to their strength and they will not be vulnerable, and people will not take advantage of them. So this is one thing. And if these cooperative societies are formed, there are several cooperative banks also which can help these cooperative societies. So government is also providing a lot of support and help to the cooperative societies. So this way the migrants can also be helped. So, but there will definitely be another sector of migrant workers who don't have that kind of skills that they can form their own cooperative societies at the village level or at the maybe a cluster of villages. In that case, these migrants will have no other option but to re-enter the city. They will have to come to city back again after the crisis subsides. So the suggestion that this article makes is, even for those migrants who will have to re-enter the city sometime in the future, even they can re-enter the city as a labor cooperative. So when they enter as a labor cooperative, they can demand that they will have to get housing and other support system so that they will have a decent standard of living along with a wage. So they can have a say in the matters of their own interest, which at present they don't have. So these collectives are going to be very helpful for them. This is what it says. So it goes on to give several examples. For example, that there have been several groups of women who work from home. So they do this parts of dry iron box. So what these women do is the parts of dry iron box were produced by some women in groups right from their homes itself. So they were exploited because this worked on a contractual basis. So there were middlemen. So these women did not even get good salaries or any benefits. So in such situations, if they form cooperatives on the other hand, then there need not be a middleman and these women can also benefit from that. So the article gives another example from Mangaluru. So this Mangaluru example talks about the beedi workers. So the beedi workers, these were women and they rolled the beedis right from their homes. So there was a middleman who supplied these women the leaf, the thread and the tobacco for the purpose of beedi making. But because there was a middleman, these women did not really have their rights. Even when they are manufacturing the beedis, they often did not get their wages. And even if the women did make the beedis, they would not be paid. They were denied the wages if they didn't submit to the sexual demands of the contractor. So this way the women were very badly harassed and exploited in this way. So in order to overcome all these sorts of exploitation, a successful collectivization or a successful unionization of the workers can protect them against these forms of exploitation. So it is talking about the strength that is there in unity, and these migrant workers who are at present very vulnerable, they can come together, form these unions, form cooperative societies. So that can be either at the village level itself or at the cluster of the villages, so they don't even have to come back to the cities, which will be very good. But even for those who have to come back to cities because of no other option, even there they can form their own unions so that they have better bargaining power and nobody will exploit them and harass them. So this was with respect to this article. The next is the MP-LAD scheme. So regarding MP-LAD scheme, we have already discussed in detail in two of the previous videos. So in this particular article, just the same reiteration of the same things and a few additions I'll be telling. So the first thing is Subhash Kashyap, who is a constitutional expert, has written a book called as Our Parliament. So this Our Parliament talks about the functions of the Parliament. So these functions of the Parliament you can use in quote this Subhash Kashyap, and you can quote the book and then mention the functions of the Parliament. So this can be very good in your polity GS2 answers, where you can definitely expect a question like critically analyze the functioning of the Parliament. So in that case, first you have to list out the functions of the Parliament. For this you can quote Subhash Kashyap and the book Our Parliament, in which the functions of the Parliament are stated. So the functions of the Parliament include, first is the political and the financial control. So this is done through the annual financial statement or the budget, passing of the demands for grants, then committees like the Public Accounts Committee and all that. Second is the supervision of the administration. So whatever administration does, so that will be looked and supervised by the Parliament. The third is the dissemination of information on the government of the day. So whatever the way the government is functioning, what all programs the government is doing, so dissemination of information regarding all these. Then next is the grievance ventilation. So the citizens may have several grievances. So the members who represent these citizens will use the Parliament as a platform where they can tell the grievances on behalf of these people and get them ventilated. Next, it also acts as a forum for national integration, because here the representations of various people from different parts of the country, they come together. So that is the national integration. And then it performs legislative and constituent functions. So these elected representatives, they have their own constituencies which they represent, and they will have to address the various issues related to these constituencies. Next is it furnishes the leadership to the nation. So these will be the leaders of the nation who will be taking the country forward. So these are the various functions of the Parliament which Subhash Kashyap talks about in the book Our Parliament. So in this regard, the article starts by mentioning these functions of the Parliament, and it is trying to fit the MP lad scheme in all these. That is, MP lad scheme, maybe in a constituency there is a grievance of the people that some school buildings are not there or the roads are not good. So in that case, MP lad scheme can be used to provide for such demands of the people. So this is very much within the function of the Parliament, that the MP lad scheme is also in sync with that. So in this context, this article is basically written by an MP of the Lok Sabha itself. So it is in defense of the MP lad scheme. So now that because of COVID crisis, the MP lad scheme has been suspended for 2 years. But the article argues that as soon as possible, the scheme must be restored. So it gives arguments in support of the MP lad scheme. The first thing it says is that many arguments, those who say that MP lad scheme should go, one of their major arguments is that there is a lot of corruption that is involved in the MP lad scheme. The money that is sanctioned under the scheme hardly goes to the development process, but is rather utilized by the politicians. So there is a lot of corruption is what is told that why this scheme should not be there. But this article says that this is not supported by empirical data. The fact that there is so much of corruption in the MP lad scheme is not supported by empirical data, because the role of MP is just to select the micro development project. That is just to determine, just to tell that this is the project which has to be done. After that, the entire implementation will be done by the district level officers, and supervision of all of these things will be done by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, which is the nodal ministry for implementing the MP lad scheme. So even the scheme also undergoes an impartial auditing process also. So the amount under the scheme will be released under 2 installments. So only after the first installment funds are used and there is a no objection that is given, only after that the second installment of the funds will be given. So this process is so foolproof that it leaves no place for corruption, is what the MPs say. So this, the argument that there is a lot of corruption in the scheme, that is why it should go, it does not hold place. There is no possibility of corruption is the first argument. The second it says is, usually what happens when a party comes to power and it announces various projects, most of these projects will be concentrated in the areas which these parties or these members from the winning party, they come from. But the constituencies which are constituencies belonging to the opposition parties, those constituencies don't get any government projects there. So this way the opposition members will not be able to satisfy the members of their constituency because of this, because the ruling party chooses the projects based on political considerations. So that is why MP lad scheme is a very good opportunity for the MPs from the opposition parties to carry out some very good developmental work in their constituencies and to ensure that they are also development takes place. If the party in power selects the projects based on political considerations. So this is the second argument that it is given. The third argument is related to the corpus of the MP lad scheme. Of this, 15% of the corpus is earmarked for the development of SCs, 7.5 for the development of STs, and around 20 lakh of the MP lad fund per annum is allocated to the differently abled. So this shows that how MP lad scheme can serve the various marginal segments, the vulnerable segments of the society also. So by doing away with it, you will be doing away with all these development that could have gone to these vulnerable sections of the society. So these are the arguments that this article gives in support of MP lad. We have already discussed twice before holistically regarding the MP lad scheme. So now we will go to the next topic, which is the climate change data. So this data was from the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. So in this Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology is located in Pune, which you should know for prelims fact. And this data says that because of the impact of global warming, the excess annual rainfall is only going to increase in India. So the first thing it says is, because of global warming, the annual rainfall is going to increase. The cyclones are going to be more severe and more frequent. But paradoxically, there will also be increase in the number of drought situations that occur. So there will be excessive rainfall, but there will also be more droughts. So that is the first thing that this data is saying. The second it says is that the frequencies of the future warm days and the warm nights are projected to increase by 55% and 70% respectively. So the frequencies of warm days will increase by 55% and the frequency of warm nights will increase by 70%. So this data is calculated by taking 1976 to 2005 period as the base period. So this is the reference period, and compared to this, this is the data. And the third important thing that this data is telling is that the heat waves over India, it is projected that they will be 3 to 4 times higher by the end of 21st century. So regarding heat waves, it says it is going to be 3 to 4 times higher by the end of 21st century. So these are the three important data which IITM has given related to global warming and climate change. So now we'll be discussing today's question. So the question was analyze the issues facing the tribals in India. So you will start by quoting some data regarding the tribals. Let's say the population, they comprise 8.6% of the population according to 2011 census, or any other data that you know about tribals. So you can start with that. Then we'll come to the issues. So with the 10 marker question, you have to write more issues, each issue consuming 1 or 2 lines of explanation. So first, let us say illiteracy. So illiteracy, because many of these tribals are also taught in English and not in their local language. So their local language is dying. The study material supplied by the government is also not available in the tribal language. So this is leading to illiteracy. Then health issues, poor health. So in this again, nutrient deficiency is there, and poor penetration of the modern healthcare system, the modern medicine system is there. So many of these tribal children and women are found malnourished. So that you can write in the health issues. Next is poverty. So yeah, in the case of health issues, you can say that because can give this example of the Sri Salam Dam project. So because of the dam, there was displacement of the Chenchu tribes. So these Chenchu tribes, then they started facing the problem of malaria also. So some example you can give related to health. And we come to poverty. So poverty is also widely prevalent. If you have a data, you can quote that. So for instance, the Saharia tribes. So among them, because of poverty, just the previous week we read this, that the Saharia tribes, because of poverty, they are forcing their girls into flesh trade. Now, particularly because the lockdown is there, so many of the Saharia tribes are forced to send their girls into flesh trade because of poverty. So these evils are also happening. Next you can say is the unemployment that is prevalent among them. So they have their own traditional occupations which is not promoted, and they are already illiterate. So this ensures this causes their lack of employment opportunities for them. And there are also other issues. For instance, the traditional employment of the Banjara tribes. In that, that is with the animals they used to do come in the circuses. So that is now not legally allowed also. And minor forest produce, that is not promoted everywhere, and nor is it a full year activity. Maybe it is a seasonal activity. So all because of all these, unemployment is there. Then you have displacement of the tribals because of mining, road and other infrastructure development projects is happening. Apart from that, these tribals are also often seen to be in conflict with forest conservation under the Wildlife Protection Act and the Environment Protection Act. So, and the rehabilitation and resettlement is also not done properly. So, displacement related issues you can say. Then, sixth is interference in their way of living. So particularly these Sentinelese, for instance, that example you can give. So there is an interference in their way of living, and they are getting assimilated into the mainstream culture, and their cultural identity is getting lost. In fact, this itself is another independent issue, that they are losing their cultural identity. So that is there. Then even today, so much of stigma is attached with the tribals. For instance, there is a Habitual Offenders Act, and Kaka committee also told that this name of this act should be changed to that Habitual Offenders Act. In that many of the scheduled tribes will be criminalized. So there is a stigma, and also the stigma is attached also with their backwardness, that they are seen with the eye of civilizing them. So that itself is wrong. So the stigma is also there. And then you can talk about the how they are being treated. For instance, the harassment that they go through. In fact, Kaka committee also highlighted that about what is called as a Naxal offense. So many of these scheduled tribes are being put in the jails, and they don't even know the reason. When they are asked what is the crime you have committed, they tell it is a Naxal crime. So they don't know. They are being harassed also. So, and even tribal women, rape and sexual molestation cases were found to have happened on them by the local officials. So all of these harassment also happens. So like that, 8 to 10 issues you can quote. So I have already quoted 8 issues. So 8 to 10 issues will be good enough for a 10 marker question. So, but even though it is not asked in the question, you have to write a little bit of way forward also, at least 2-3 lines you have to write. So in that you can say that a Panchsheel policy of tribals, where the tribals should be developed but in their own way, that is very important. And the reservation benefits will have to be ensured for them. And welfare schemes, yesterday we saw a successful example of the Vandhan Yojana scheme that you can quote. And even in our previous classes itself, we have quoted several examples. For instance, the Toda tribes. So they they are selling their unique embroidered shawls and etc. And now because of the lockdown, they are selling embroidered masks also. And Trifed and Amazon have linked up with each other, where Amazon is selling several tribal products also. So all of these, with this way forward, you can conclude your answer. What we have to do, we can conclude your answer. uh, okay, I'm so sorry, I have forgotten to put the question slide. So what we can do is, in the comment section you can suggest any question of your own. So whatever question I feel is relevant, I'll just discuss it tomorrow. So I'll leave the choice of question to you for today. So that's it for today. Thank you.